So it is 5:30, and we'll go ahead and call to order this City Council work session. This is not a business session, so we won't be taking any votes in this meeting. We'll just be discussing. I'll note for the record that all members of council are present and accounted for. And as always, we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you're able, please stand and join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the first work session item will be the tax digest and millage rate levy. Director Harris, I believe you have the floor on this one.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you obviously know and recall, that we adopted the 2024 budget on June 19th after a process of public hearings, et cetera, June 19, 23. And we established the millage rates at 4.87 and 0.880 for a total of 5.75. In June 28th, after we had that adoption process, we got the digest, and I think we circulated some information on that digest on what it was doing, and primarily because it was when we ran our ads, we weren't expecting that kind of growth, mainly in the reassessments of residential, or really reassessments overall values, because we can't determine whether it's on the commercial or residential. I assume it's on the residential, but that was so significant that we fell outside of the ads we were required. So we're primarily here to start the process over for the impact of running those ads so we can formally adopt the millage rates for the 2024 budget. But along that same line, obviously, the additional growth provided us about $1,795,000 of $1,008,000 of new revenues or additional revenues in the property tax line item. So this evening, we also have the budget, the actual budget adoption or a budget being amended for that $1,795,000. But primarily, again, we're here because we missed the market a little bit on the advertisements. So we have to re-advertise the process and reestablish the millage rates. I know you did have a workshop on July 17th, albeit probably was the best one you ever had because I wasn't here and was unable to make it. But I think you got some discussion about that $1,795,000, and I think our administrator sent out a recent, I think last week, an email referencing some of the things that came up as far as using it for capital or a few other things. So I don't know if he wants to jump in from there.
That's a good summary. The discussion tonight was really just to have a work session item so that there's a discussion with no anticipated vote on to what you may want to do with that $1,008,000 that we will be looking to approve as new revenues in the budget. You certainly could appropriate it to things. You could let it sit in the budget based and wait upon capital projects later in the year. What we're asking you to do tonight doesn't mean you have to identify what happens to that $1,008,000, but I also had heard from a couple of you that you wanted to have a discussion with your colleagues about it before being asked to vote on the budget. And the first time you're doing that is this evening. So this is really just a general discussion. We'll take your feedback as to if you wanted to invest it into some recurring things, make some capital investments, which probably is the better recommendation, to take some of the unfunded capital projects off and look and see what would prioritize high. We just look to you for that feedback, and that was a good baseline, Tom.
Any questions from council? Councilman Will.
Tom, I got a couple questions from some folks in the city that I couldn't answer, so I figured this would be a good time to ask you, and that way everybody can see it because they're watching, actually. The local paper published this article about the tax digest and the 5-year history of the levies. And in that, they show a gross millage rate starting at 8.5 and climbing to 8.9. and a net starting at 4.7 and climbing to 4.9. Are you familiar with that at all?
Our 5-year ad.
Because I was making the argument that our tax millage rate has not gone up, and yet this article appears to say that it does.
The gross, the way we're required to run that ad is to, what would the millage rate be if we did not have the local option sales tax revenues that provide us the 1 penny out of your 7.75 pennies that you pay? When that came into being, prior to me being here, for us to get that local option shared tax to our budgets throughout the state, the advertisements then are that you have to say, at least from my perspective, say, but for this local option sales tax, this would be your millage rate. Because those local option sales tax dollars are helping fund the general fund budget. And if they had not been approved by the referendum or state law, I'm just drawing a blank here because I'm trying to remember all this stuff, then your millage rate would have been X.
So when
Does that make sense? So every year when that local option sales goes, when that we get more and more local option sales tax number, then you arbitrarily, if I can use that word, gross up the gross tax and then back it back down, and we stay at 5.75 mils.
So in this article, it says that the gross is 8.9, and then it says bond millage 0.79, then it says lost of 3.1 for a net of 4.9. Are we supposed to add the 4.95 to the 0.799 to get back to the 5 point? This is very confusing. Get back to
Yes,
5.8?
yes, you are correct. The 5.95, you got two millage rates there, the bond millage and the net M&L. It's really, your general fund budget is your 4.951, see that?
Mm-hmm.
And the 0.799 is up above that as the
Yep.
bond millage, that's 5.75. And if you go across that blue, I don't know if you have a blue
Yeah, it's
version.
gray on mine.
But if
yes.
you go across that all the way, all those years from 2018 to 2023, it stays at 5.75.
If I could pause you here, since you have the ability to see what you're talking about, and neither us nor the public.
Sorry.
Does anybody have any graphics that
I
we
have
could
this.
present for this?
And I appreciate that. That makes perfect sense now. I was lost when I was asked the question, and I felt like,
Lost. That was,
I don't know what I'm talking about.
no pun intended on the word lost.
Not seen that article, so.
Yep,
I'm
there
not
it is.
familiar with it at all.
We are required by
article they
state law
posted.
to run these ads, and this is one of them. And it's your history of the levy. And what the question was we're required to, I'll wait for it to get a little more zoomed in, hopefully. Required to incorporate the revenues we generate from local option sales tax. I don't know if that's clear or not there, but in the calculation, if you look down, trying to make sure I see it somewhere. Okay, if you look down in the 1, 2, 3, 4th section, it will say less the lost rollback. So in total, you were still work backwards under the state law. So we have a debt millage, just so you know, we established that debt millage. We're changing it from the budget we adopted. We're changing it this evening to a new millage rate because of the increase in revenue. So we set that millage rate sufficient to pay the bonds on our GO bonds. So if we got more revenues generated, then we don't need that kind of millage rate.
And just so the people at home can follow along.
Yeah.
GO bond is a,
General obligation bond, sorry. Backed
so
by the
that's
full
one
faith
that's
of
been
the
approved by the voters.
They're approved by the voters.
Okay.
That debt service, what is the millage rate required to service that debt? And that's 0.799. Then, as council, this year's direction so far has been that we should stay at 5.75 mils. So the additional mills go over to the other line item, the net M&O millage, that's your operating millage, that's your general fund millage rate, and that's going to go to 4.951, and that's where I've indicated that that's $1.795 million, $1.8 million more to the general fund by those millage rates. Likewise, we have to put in the impact in mills, in terms of mills, the $20 million that we generate in local option sales tax based on previous year. And that generates, that equates to what would be if you weren't getting that from a local option sales tax, but you were required to put it on your digest, it would be 3.159 mils. And then we show our gross millage rate is 8.909. So we're doing that to comply with state law. So I know people could view that local option sales tax differently, but I think what it's trying to reflect there is if you assume the budget is sound, it's balanced, it needs to generate, it needs these mills that are reflected here, especially on the general fund net M&O millage rate, then but for that local option sales tax that they voted in that is good because people that don't live here are paying for it. So it's now a good chunk of 3.159 mills, equivalent mills, are being paid for by us and people that live outside of us that come in and use our service.
So simplistically speaking, add the net and the bond, and that's what our millage rate is at 5.75. The lost is variable and is what's driving that number up.
It's driving the gross up.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilman Binder?
Thank you, Mayor Gilman. And I appreciate you putting this together. The presentation and the packet was very good. I guess what I'm trying to understand, and it's just maybe a thought, like if we've seen an increase of our revenues, our tax digest, I think it's incumbent on us to make the case of why we need that. So is it the recommendation of staff to put it unallocated, which is what I'm seeing, or at what point do we show the residents, okay, this is what we want to allocate it to? Because I'm having a little bit of trouble saying, let's just put it into unallocated and then we'll figure it out later. I've been harping on a 5-year capital plan. Hopefully we can plug it into that and say that's what we need, or something else.
I think I can try to address it.
Leave my anxiety on that.
I think a couple things. One, we talk about it all the time. Just our recurring capital every year is 15 million. It's going up all the time. And I'm talking about milling and resurfacing, fleet replacements, more expensive vehicles to buy. All these things drive that. Every single year we have to do milling, stormwater, fleet replacement, lighting, throughout the city, as you know. And let's say that's $15 million. We try to fund. Years ago, we had a line item in the general fund budget pre-COVID, $4 million, I think. Can't remember if it was heading towards 5, but it was 4. We had to bring that down, probably arbitrarily, thinking COVID was going to be real bad, brought it down to 0. It is now in this year's budget, prior to today, at $4 million line item. Now, we get fund balance from the year before, that was about 10 million, so we're getting 14, somewhere around 14, or getting close to that 15 million because of the fund balance being, you were a little wrong, Tom, on your revenues and expenses. And so, but together, at the end of the day, that's generating close to that number. So, but that number is only 4 million in today's budget, and the need is greater than it was pre-COVID at that line item. So one argument is this will help fund continued capital. And the way it's in the budget now, just for a placeholder, is that it would go there from the operating budget over the general fund, over $1.8 million more over into the capital project fund and into the council now or whatever, direct something differently. It will sit in unallocated. That unallocated account in the 2024 budget prior to this evening, I had the numbers. I can't remember where I wrote them, was 2.8 or 2.5, and this brings it to 3 plus, but I don't know if I have that written here. Do you know that number? Unallocated? Yeah. So it's just going in that placeholder in an unallocated capital in that fund to cover whatever needs you may
What-
have.
I'm hearing like the generator, which makes sense, you know, like it should be added to the list, but it wasn't on a list for the CIP projection, right? The 5-year plan that I was constantly asking for.
Yeah, I mean, our 5-year CIP
Was it included in that or not?
it includes, it's in our budget document, I'm not sure, yeah.
What?
Well, there's a fund balance and a line item for funded, how much is funded out of the line item? 4 million.
Talking about the CIP, that capital projection, but we can
We
pull
can
it up
talk-
on the
yeah.
next meeting. But I guess like if we're talking about the fire stations, I'll bring that up again. Where I don't think we have the money to fix those up, which need to get fixed. I'd like to know where it doesn't need to be an unallocated when we know where there are some things that need to get done. Why
Yes,
put
I
it
mean,
in
that's,
unallocated?
that's the direction. I mean, at some point, couple things. One, unallocated account. Every year, we probably leave $1 million to $2 million in there just because during the year, things are going to have escalations in all the 15 or 16 million that was funded this year in capital funding could have CPI increases and other things that were unknown. So then where do you go to? You go to that unallocated account that I just said, and I'm drawing a blank. Let's say it's $2 million. Now we'll have 3.8. So it's not that large of a number given that. But if there's other direction that you want to say it goes towards a generator for City Hall, that could come tonight. That could come anytime during the fiscal year. We say that's where we want to use the monies. And it could go for something we think is one time this year, but maybe setting it up and saying, hey, I'd like to use it for this generator, but I want to sort of have an open mind that maybe next year it would help pay for the fire stations going forward, because that's probably going to take it may take a financing or something to get those done. May or may not, but.
I've mentioned it a few times where I think we need to start setting up a precedent and funds of what we need to maintain, whether it's stormwater, whether it's the fire stations, things that we have not taken care of. And putting it in unallocated scares me which is pretty close for me, future councils, that it can go to maybe towards nice to have things that would jump ahead of the things that we need to have kind of systemized, recurrent.
Well, I mean, to your point, if I can make one last thing, that, again, $15 million, the assumption would be that 50% of it be a line item, so $7.5 million you would get to more formally with a line I'm saying. So 50%, 50 cents on every dollar of capital needs that are recurring needs, not wants, is funded by a commitment of the general fund. And then we'll use the art of fund balance, or what falls to the bottom line, to help support that. That's been finance's goal, and we were at 5 million years ago. We're at 4 million now. So putting it in that line item is where we're doing. We just haven't identified which recurring things or what things we want to spend that on right now, not without your guys' input.
Okay.
Councilman DeVito.
Can you explain what you just said about the 50%? I didn't catch what you were.
Every year, our commitment is we need to come up with $15 million to maintain our assets. It'd be great in the world to say you're going to put $15 million as a line item in our budget. When I mean line item budget, means the property taxes of this year's property taxes, this year's local option sales tax, this year's franchise fees, minus all the police salaries, fire salaries, my salary, everybody's salaries, all the expenses. We need to have $15 million going over there. On
And
the
that
current
goes in the
tax structure.
capital project.
That's hard to imagine that you can get there.
That's in the
because-
capital project fund.
Yes, to the capital project fund. What you want to do is try to have at least a goal of 50% to get there, because we do operate a conservative budget. Why? Because we have to maintain the AAA, to be compared to other cities. So knowingly, to some extent, you are building in sort of a haphazard way of funding the other $7.5 million by being conservative on the revenues and expenses. So together, you're okay. If you tried to build the 15 perfectly, you're going to budget every single revenue to the penny, every expense to the penny to get that 15 million built in the budget. And then that leads to departments being scared to death they're going to spend anything happening during the year to pay penny more. So it's an art. It's the art in budgeting that you should try to hit that 50%.
And in the past, before I got back on council, it was before pandemic, was 4 million a year you were.
We were getting it up to 4. Again, it's never been perfectly at that 50% because we have been conservative in years, but it was the goal
But you
always.
said something earlier that due to cost increases, inflation, what have you, it's still unknown where the economy is going. The Fed may raise interest rates one more time, possibly. Who knows where it's going? Oil prices are going up again. That has an impact on our current projected budget as far as the things we're going to invest in on behalf of the taxpayer, right? So putting it in unallocated, are we not just, in effect, creating some sense of a buffer to address those cost increases that we cannot anticipate when we pass the original budget?
Yes, to an extent, yes, on both operating and capital, because you could bring it back into the operating budget as well. There's nothing that would prohibit from bringing it back in and funding operating type expenses. It is $1.8 million of new revenues for the budget.
Okay, thank
That
you.
right now, we just have put a placeholder that if you're going to follow the logic that that could go towards capital, it's over there. But that doesn't mean, again, we had a solid budget that council approved at $4 million in that line item. And that was a good budget. It's just the argument is, can we just put this money there and then it sets it up for the future that it's there? But there certainly could be arguments made by anybody of other pressing needs as we try to build towards that policy.
Councilman Will.
So just, again, for clarity, because I love clarity, essentially because this council hasn't decided what to do with the 1.8, that's why we're putting it into this fund. If we decide what to do with it, we can pull it back out.
Correct.
That's the only reason it's going there, because we haven't decided.
Correct.
Okay. My second question is actually for you. And to follow up on what Jason was saying, I remember us talking about, when we talked about doing the fire station assessment, what it was going to cost to keep it going. We also talked about doing one for the entire city, a whole facilities, I don't remember what that thing's called you talked about, where we mapped out all of our facilities, all of our equipment, and said this is a lifespan, this is what it costs. Have we done that study? Do we need to do that study?
We haven't done that study yet. We've started with the fire stations. That study would come subsequent to that to do a citywide facilities assessment.
How much would that cost, do you think?
I'd have to get a quote.
But that would address what he said, which is this is our facilities assessment, this is what we need, we know what it is, and we should budget
Correct.
towards that.
And if I could, Mr. Mayor, can I continue with the?
Mr.
Thank
Lagerbloom,
you.
you do have the floor, sir.
Thank you. And I just want to be clear, too, that just because it is a true statement that you could put this in unallocated dollars in the capital project account and then allocate it to a project later, you could do just the opposite, which is to allocate it to a project that you feel is important at this point. And if the conditions change, as Councilman Dorito would suggest, if the conditions change and we deal with different inflationary pressures that we don't have currently, it's a two-way street. So you can put it in a project, realize the world changed, and take it out of a project and put it somewhere else, just as though you could let it sit on an allocated account and wait for the future to happen and decide where to put it. So you all, as a group of seven, have the authority to go both of those directions. I can't do it, Tom can't do it, but you collectively as the council could today say, it's a better use to put it into facility assessments. Let's hold it as a placeholder there rather than holding it in unallocated. If the world changes, I would come back to you and say, we need to take some of that money out of what we held as a facilities number, and we need to put it to something different. So you've got,
It doesn't matter where we put it.
correct, you've got latitude to go, and honestly, you've got latitude if you wanted to take it out of the capital projects fund and bring it back to the general fund. I'd have to bring you a new budget ordinance, and you'd have to adopt it twice, but you could even do that mid-year if you wanted to. So you all have all the authority in the world when it comes to this budget. We can make good recommendations to you, so even if you choose one tonight and change your mind at the meeting on the 28th, that's possible too. So I just don't want you to think you're backing yourself into a corner by saying it either has to go to project facilities tonight or it has to go to North Point Parkway, for example. You have the luxury that you can be right tonight, and if you're wrong in the future, we can make you right again.
Any other questions from council? Tom, I do have just a few, and I think mostly because this is a very complex issue, especially for people who don't dig into governmental budgets in depth. And I just kind of, because we've been through this since I've been on council over the last 6 years, go back to where we got to this position. So, first of all, it is true that the homeowners in Alpharetta who owned their home prior to 2018, their property taxes never go up. Their assessments, the property values, never go up more than 3% or less if the CPI, the Consumer Product Index, is less than 3%. And that was imposed by the state legislature because we rely on Fulton County Tax Assessor's Office to provide us the annual data that we use to make our financial decisions, because a great portion of our of our revenues are from property taxes, and we have to wait until the tax assessor gives us those numbers. The reason we're going through it now is because they gave us numbers that we projected, and then they came back and changed the numbers, which isn't unusual. But in 2018, they had neglected to keep up to the annual growth in our tax digest for years. And so what we had was the city of Alpharetta as a governmental entity had not grown the tax digest as it naturally was growing because the tax adjuster didn't go and assess them at the market values, which is fine. But when they came out in 2018, they had such a huge increase in property values that it stunned all of us as homeowners and all of our residents, because sometimes they had skipped graduating market values for 5 to 6 years, and some people were hit with a 200%, 300% increase in their property taxes. And so the state legislature looked at how they could remedy this problem. And what they did was go back, I believe, to 2016 property values. Does that sound right?
Yes.
So they went back to the previous values that were not reflective of market values at 2018, which was hundreds of millions of property values that were scaled back. So that was a tremendous tax relief for all of us here as property owners and all of our property owners in the city of Alpharetta. And so we all benefited in the city by that, but it set us back years on our projected revenues and then capped that increase for most part at 3%. So what that explains to us, and I hope it makes it a little clear to all of you, is that because we have that cap, it protects our property owners from pre-2018, but it also stems the tide of property value increases and the revenues that are generated by that. And I say all that to explain that unless you sold your home in the past few years, these property tax impacts are not reflected in your property except maximum of 3%. See what I'm saying? So when Tom talks about the digest going up and perhaps on residential properties, what I'm telling you is those are all sales that have occurred since 2018, or they would be capped at 3%.
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to make that clear, because I probably didn't make it clear because it's pretty complex anyway, but I just wanted to make sure that some people that are really trying to follow this and understand can understand where that happened. I also want to point out, once again, like you had mentioned, these numbers that are dictated and the ratios and all that stuff by the state, that 10.33% that was indicated there, the net taxes, if you include lost and all that stuff, what that says is the services and the things that the city is providing to our residents and the people who come to our community now would cost that millage rate if we didn't have the sales tax in place.
Correct.
And it's actually less because the county did get additional revenues from that sales tax revenue in the recent agreement. But that's not, we're adding an extra 3%. Is if we did not have that lost sales tax, it would cost 10.33 mills to provide the same level of service that we do now. So that's really all I wanted to point out, just for clarity's sake. If there's no other questions for staff, do you have the clarity that you need?
I think I do. I guess maybe just in closing, where we will go tonight is just to leave the budget as presented and advertised. Ask that you move forward with it, recognizing that what you're doing is you are then just adding $1.8 million into unallocated capital. I don't want to go too much further down the path before we come back to this discussion and say, okay, now you've had some time to think about it. Let's talk about where that 1.8 can go. My preference is to put it into a project rather than just to let it continue to sit there idle. Idle cash, especially public funds, doesn't make investment into Alpharetta at all. It just sits on the books. So we've got direction for tonight. We'll come back and further the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So that'll wrap up the tax digest and millage rate levy work session. We do have an executive session scheduled for this evening. Did you want to try to go ahead and do that?
With the time, Mr. Mayor, being at 6 o'clock, yes, I think we can get both of the items we need to talk about in executive session complete before the evening meeting begins.
Would that meet with the will of council? Yes, sir. Do I have a motion to adjourn into, or recess into executive session? I have a motion by Councilman Mitchell, second by Councilman Will.
Before you move on, Mr. Mayor, the city attorney's asked that we just announce what the topics are that we're going in there for. So for tonight, it's litigation and land acquisition.
Thanks, sir. Any discussion? All those in favor of recessing into executive session, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote accordingly. And it does pass unanimously. So we'll look forward to seeing everyone at our regularly scheduled 6:30 meeting.
There's a bunch of them at her seat. Well, kind of just go, they've done some stuff. Yeah.
We need to reconvene the work session and adjourn it if we can.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've been in executive session, so I'll need a motion to reconvene from City Council.
So move, Mayor.
Motion by Councilman Dorito, second by Mayor Pro Tem Merkel. All those in favor of reconvening the meeting, please vote yes. And it does pass unanimously. So welcome, it's official now. So I'll note for the record that we still have a full roll of city council members.
Mr. Mayor, we actually have to adjourn that work session. You've reconvened it, now you have to adjourn it. And then I have to
Thank you for
have a
clarifying.
couple of minutes between the end of this work session and the beginning of the actual meeting to shift from one stream to the other, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so now that we've reconvened, can we adjourn, a motion to adjourn the work session? I have a motion by Councilman Hypes, second by Councilman Will. All those in favor of adjourning the work session, please vote yes. We are adjourned. Now we'll take a 2-minute break while we reset everything for the actual meeting. Thank you, James.